I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mr. Walsh, would you lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sunshine Law Statement. All requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been met for this meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Oradell. Notice of this meeting was filed with the Record and Town News and all persons requesting such notice. Mr. Darian, would you read the mission statement?
The Oradell Public School District is dedicated to the ongoing pursuit of educational excellence through comprehensive, innovative curriculum and instruction. The district is committed to providing opportunities for social, emotional, and academic discovery to foster curiosity, courage, and character. Our goal is to prepare our students to become lifelong learners who are self-directed, resilient, productive, responsible citizens.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mrs. Acosta, Mrs. Needham,
Here.
Mrs. Downey, Mr. Griffin,
Here.
Mrs. Norian,
Here.
Mrs. Walker,
Here.
Mr. Walsh,
Here,
Mr. Darian,
Here.
Mrs. Nichols.
Here, open to the public for agenda items only. Okay. So if you could state your name and your address.
Jen Allen, 954 Wildwood Road.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I think this is an agenda item. I'm not really
It
sure.
has to be an agenda item. for
Okay,
this
so you can
section.
let me know if it is, because I believe it is,
Okay.
but I'm not really sure. I would just like to strongly encourage the board to rethink your snow day policy and the way it's given back. Hold on, I wrote myself a few notes. I think an extended Memorial break weekend vacation is lovely if you are a family where you have a parent that doesn't work, you have a full-time nanny. I feel as though many of the policies that we have at Oradell Public School often consider families as one way. Families that have set vacation time, that plan for such vacation time, have allotted it, used it. I have so many friends, my daughter's in kindergarten now, that are educators in many different districts. The policy of an educator, as a teacher, you can't take off the day before a holiday or the day after. So where does that leave you for childcare? I know the policy historically has been because of a sixth grade graduation. It's not college. Sixth graders can return to school for 4 days after they graduate. Days of fun, days of transition to middle school activities. A policy shouldn't be because of sixth grade graduation, and maybe it's not, maybe there's more to it. 4 snow days don't need to be built into a calendar. Days can be added to a school year so that families can prepare. I just think that it's a policy, it sort of was my gripe for Halloween. Why do kids get sent home for lunch to change into a costume? Kids have been going in costume since they were 2 years old to a daycare center, if that's where they went. Or option to change themselves. And yes, they had the option to stay at school, but when 19 out of the 21 kids in their class are going home, you feel pressured as a parent to keep up with the Joneses. And I just think this is one of those policies that you shouldn't need to keep up with the Joneses. We should be thinking about all the families of Oradell, not the upper white middle class. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other agenda items? Okay, moving on, I think I want to talk about TAG, but I'm assuming our superintendent is going to mention it, because I think we had good news, so I'll move to the superintendent's report.
I think Mr. Griffin and Mr. Walsh would be just as happy to share that as judges, they both were there to see, they didn't get to watch our Odyssey teams compete, our Odyssey of the Mine teams compete at the state tournament April 1st, and there's lots of exciting things that happened with Odyssey this year. First of all, this was the first year we opened it up to all 4th graders. So our 4th and 5th grade team actually had 4th graders on, and That team placed fifth in the state. They will not be qualifying for the World Finals, but I have to tell you, the growth that they made during the past few months was truly remarkable. When I would go down to watch them, they wouldn't talk to me. And there they were competing and talking to the judges and, explaining their process and explaining their props. I sent each one of the member of that team a note of appreciation and gratitude because I was so proud to be able to say that they were representing this district because they did phenomenal. And our sixth grade team, we often say that our sixth graders are at a disadvantage when they compete because they compete in the middle school division. So they compete against eighth graders. Well, there's no eighth grader in the state that could take that team down. They are confident. They are independent thinkers. They did win the state title for their problem in their division, and they will be traveling to Michigan to represent New Jersey and Oradell Public School at World Finals in the end of May. So after that happens in June, we will invite them to a board meeting, and they can share more about their teams, their problems, and maybe even a little spontaneous practice for you. So the bigger part of my report today is that last week, the state of New Jersey released school performance reports for every school in the state. And they put those reports on the state website. And very soon, you will probably see on either nj.com or northjersey.com that really big spreadsheet ranking of every school. And I realized that we've never taken the time to go over where that number comes from. So I thought today I would take some time to explain the school performance report to you. So the school performance report has been happening for a very, very long time. It's looked very different the past 2 years because there wasn't standardized testing data. But what it in essence does is it gives data of every school, every district in the state of New Jersey, whether elementary school, middle school, or high school. It gives data about student demographics. It gives data about teacher demographics. How long have teachers stayed in the district? What types of education do teachers have in that district? Performance report data with regards to state testing, with regards to English language testing, and my favorite measure, which is growth. So when you opened it up, and it is a very dense document, and it will be linked on the front page of our website by the end of this week, and all parents will also receive a link to the data. You will find data on all of these topics in there. Most of it is kind of objective graphs, but there are also narrative sections as well. It includes data about student safety. So when we report our violence and vandalism data, when we report our HIB data, that goes on there as well. It shows student enrollment, and not just our overall student enrollment, which we know is up. As of today, our student enrollment at Oradell Public School is 799 students. So if you look at where we were in 2019-20, that is a almost 50 student increase. It also includes data on the percentage of our students with disabilities, the percentage of our students that are English language learners. Now, I realize this is a little bit hard to see, and I wish I could make it bigger. I know the board has a copy. When I talk about that score on the website, on the bottom of this, you're going to see a summative rating. That summative rating for Oradell Public School is 95.19. That means that when the state put all of this data together and compared it to other elementary schools in the state of New Jersey, Oradell Public School performed better than 95.19% of those schools. That score is comprised of several things. It is comprised of what is our achievement score, so how many of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations on language arts and mathematics proficiency exams. It includes scores on our growth. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that specifically today because I think it's one of the most important predictors. How are our students growing compared to their peers? It shares data on our English language proficiency indicator score, how many of our students are exiting our ELL program or making progress in that program. And it also includes a chronic absenteeism score. So what does absenteeism look like in the district? The one thing to always know if you start looking at other schools' score reports is some of these percentages will get changed. You need to have 20 students in your school that are ELL students to have an ELL score. So the majority of our comparable schools in Bergen County will not have an ELL score, and their growth score will get, instead of being 20%, will be 25%. So when we talk about those student assessment results, we're talking about the NJSLA and the access for ELLs. And this is just a little bit about the data we've been speaking about all year. So this is last spring's data. 81% of our students in grades 3 through 6 either scored a 4 or a 5 in the language arts assessment. Now, underneath that, you'll see annual target. Our goal from the state, the goal the state gave Oradell Public School, was 74.6. That goal comes from the state's decision under the Elementary Student Succeeds Act that all students in the state of New Jersey, 80% of students in the state of New Jersey, should be passing state assessments. So they took that and they went backwards. And they said, for that to happen, this is the percentage that you have to reach this year, or this year. The reason we show met goal in language arts is because we are already at that 80% rate. However, in math, our 75.9 is not at that 80% rate, so we haven't met the goal yet. However, we've met our target score where the state said, this is where we want you to be this year. And again, you'll see that we often say we can't compare ourselves to the state. Our students have more opportunities, and we expect more of our students, so you'll see that our scores are much higher than the state. The local assessment results for English language learners, and I'm going to read this data for you because I realize it's very hard. So in 0 to 2 years in the district, so our students who receive English as a second language instruction, we have 32 of them who have been in the district for 0 to 2 years. That may mean they're a kindergartner, a first or a second grader, or that may mean that they're new to the district. They may be new to the district from another country. They may be new to the district from another district. 28 of those students have scored a 4.5, which exits them from the English as a second language program. We don't have that specific data for students who are here longer because numbers are too small, so it would be identifiable. Now, you'll notice again, we're exceeding our target in our English language, although I will talk a little bit about that, this being one of the areas that Dr. Roth, as the administrator who oversees the ESL program, and our English language learning instructors and I are talking a lot about because our results didn't jive with what we've seen in the past. So student growth. Okay. So prior to this year, every student in grades 4 through 6 in the state of New Jersey had what was called a median growth percentile score. So I'm going to use John over here, and John's in 4th grade, okay? And John, in 3rd grade, scored a 750, okay, on the math part of the NJSLA. So when John is in 4th grade, his growth score would be compared to every other student in the state of New Jersey who scored a 750. And the state would say, John grew more than, I'm sure, 99% of those students in the state of New Jersey, and that would be his growth percentile score. How the state of New Jersey evaluates teachers, one of the measures, is the teacher gets the median growth percentile score for their classroom. That's part of their evaluation score. How Mrs. Hawley, as the principal of Oradell Public, gets evaluated is that is part of her evaluation, the median growth percentile score for the entire school. The problem was there has been a test for 2 years, so this could not be used as a measure of growth. So this year what the state did is, and they had to do this because federal government said you have to have a way to measure growth, they came up with the relative school improvement measure. And what that does is, if you look at the table, not on the next page, on the page after that, it takes the different subgroups and also all students in Oradell Public School, and it takes their average score, on this slide it's language arts, in 2017-18, their average score in 1819, and it creates a weighted average. That weighted average also takes into account how many students there were, so it may not look like the exact average. Then it took their score in 2021-22, and it compared them to all the other schools that had a score between 775 and 785. So in Oradell Public School, our students grew more than 91% of the other schools that were in their comparison group. Now, it does that not just for the whole school, but for each of these subgroups as well. So the RSIM is how much did each of these groups grow compared to other schools who performed similarly in 2017-18 and 2018-19. Now that score goes right back to that original percentage. So then when we look at math, we can see that our growth scores are not as high. And we'll see what we spoke about a few months ago about something we saw for the first time, that former English language learners were showing weaker growth in mathematics. And that's something that we've already started to target and look at. So what it does then, those growth scores, also every subgroup in the school and the group as a whole, those subscores and those percentages, they have to meet certain goals. So what this table does is it tells you if any of our subgroups are not meeting their goals. And you can see here that everyone is either meeting the goal, which means they're already at 80%, or they're meeting what the target was for that grade year. So it's a lot of data to tell you that we're doing okay. But it's all of that data that goes back to this score over here, this 95.19. So it's always really important to remember that when we see that in the paper, it's not just about how many students passed the test, in a way, it's also about what kind of growth we're making as a school. The other pieces that go into that 95.1 score are chronic absenteeism and attendance, and this is something that we at the school level and at the district level are starting to look at much more seriously. In the past, our chronic absenteeism as a school was almost always around 3.5%. Last year it was 5.9%. That 5.9% actually is not great compared to our peer districts. So that's something that attendance is, it's not just about the score. Attendance impacts everyone. If a student's not in class and 3 students aren't in class and everyone comes back the next day, and now we have a teacher who's trying to catch some students up and move some students forward. So attendance isn't just about the individual student, it's about school operations as a whole. We have been sending out attendance letters to students who were chronically absent at certain points of the year, and we will be looking to implement some other protocols moving forward as well to really stress to parents that attendance 95% of the time isn't in the student's control. It's where we need parents as partners. And we look at each of these subgroups as well. And we also look at attendance by grade level. We know that in pre-K and kindergarten, parents often see that as not compulsory education, so they're more likely to keep their children out of school. So this 10 in 6th grade last year is actually high for that specific grade level for us overall. So our next steps will be to email school performance report links to families. We'll post this on our website. As I said, we are really looking at our English language learners. You know that in the starting last summer and again this summer, we'll be using our ESSER funding to have some of our English language learners come to Explorations for free to keep their English language learning up over the summer. Even conversational language in Explorations helps with that, especially since the majority of our students are in K, 1st and 2nd grade. And we are going to continue to monitor our attendance protocols. If you have any other interests about the school performance report, I know when it comes out, like, I sit at my office and, okay, I might have looked at 50 school performance reports, because I'm just really interested in where are the trends and how are we doing, and is somebody out there doing something that I want to know more about as well. So as I read their narratives, I see what's new there. A lot of times a district will talk about a new program they're doing or something in that area. So you can also read about more schools, and the state also, for those of you who found this a little dense and wordy, they have a feedback survey, so you can tell them that as well. Do you have any questions about the performance report?
I have a general comment. The school performance reports out on the New Jersey Department of Ed website, the whole interface and the functionality of the data has improved over the years. And it used to be a major pain. You'd have to be very fluent in analyzing CSV files or downloading Excel files and then figuring out what the column headings were. But now it's really easy. So I just, I keep a favorite link, under my OPS folder. And it's just great to look at. So if you have any questions, like Megan had said, she does a lot of comparisons between us and other districts. I just recommend, become familiar with the site. It's so easy to compare.
If there are no other questions, that concludes my report.
I have one question. The 46 kids chronically absent.
Mhm.
Does that include pre-K or no? Are we missing
It's
something?
not supposed to include pre-K. This was an issue several years ago. I do not believe it does, because the year it was an issue, we went back and looked at all our coding.
It
and
shouldn't, I would think.
It should
right?
not.
But
And
should these add up to 46 then? Am I missing?
does it add up to 46 with pre-K? I can pull.
Unless I'm missing it. Am I missing it? It does?
Oh,
I can't add apparently.
Yeah. Without pre-K, correct? Yes. I think it was about
I
5
get
years ago.
41. I think it's supposed to include.
It's
pre-K.
41.
41.
It's 41, but it was 46. I can go back and look at and see if I have raw data. This data is pulled from every June.
Okay.
There's an upload, so I can look at the data in there.
Because where does number 46 come from? Is that from the state? They calculate those numbers? Okay. Anything else? Mr. Marmora?
Thank you. Just a friendly reminder that everyone's favorite homework, the financial disclosure statements, are due at the end of this month, April 30th. Also, New Jersey School Boards has just announced the dates for their workshop 2023, which is going to be in October. So it'll be October 23rd through October 26th in Atlantic City. And if anyone is interested, please let me know. The early bird registration has opened up, and the hotels do book up quickly. And finally, on our next meeting, we'll be presenting the 23-24 final budget. That'll be at April 26th board meeting. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Moving on to minutes, we have review of March 15th. Any questions or comments, please email Mr. Marmara. We have approval of February 15th. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes of February 15th.
Second by Mrs. Walker. Any questions? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian? Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Abstain.
Mr. Darian?
I was there, right? Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, committee reports, Mr. Darian, administrative.
Yes, I would like to introduce administrative items A1 and A2.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Wolf. Any questions? Mr. Griffin?
So I do have a question on the calendar. If we didn't do the around Memorial Day days, and I did read the memo before about why we are doing that. But if we didn't do that, what would be the other option on
Yeah,
using?
The other option is if we don't, well, there's two options.
Mm-hmm.
One, the way we do it now, if we book 3 snow days and we don't use them, we take them off at year end.
Mm-hmm.
So we would just have to book graduation earlier, because if we're not a high school, we don't have project graduation set, like, so we would have to, we can book it earlier.
Okay.
The other way to do it is some schools book 0 snow days. They set their graduations, and then if they use some, they add to the end of the year.
Okay. And current, so we usually, it's 4? that we-
3 this year.
3. And it varies each year, what we build in?
We've been sticking, we had 4 for a while, we found it was too many. I think Riverdale does 4. We went to 2 one year. This year,
Right.
we just happened to not have any snow days.
Right.
Something to discuss. I think this year it's too late to change this because it went out on the calendar saying this is when we're going to use it, but it is a discussion we should have going forward.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Walker?
but I also believe part of the scheduling, especially around Memorial Day, is with Riverdale. And we are a sending district to Riverdale, and that's when they give back their snow days there. So
Right.
that makes it for more family-oriented.
Is there a way we can add this to next agenda for personnel, for discussion?
Well, it's something we have to do by next year, so,
No, I know, but it's fresh in our mind.
yeah. Mrs. Walker, you want to add that to the agenda for personnel next time?
I was looking at you. I was looking at you that I made that
I'm shaking
comment.
my head, yes, I'm not doing a thing.
Any other question? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian? Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes,
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, buildings and grounds, Mr. Darian?
Yes, I have one item to introduce, but before I do that, I'd like to just give an update on some activities, and I'd like to make a comment that lately we've had a lot of work done around the building, or the grounds. I'd like to commend Mr. Marmora and our supervisor of buildings and grounds, Paul, for all the work that they've been doing. We have a lot of projects going on simultaneously, so I commend them for their work. And with that, I'd just like to, I know that a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about right now is in your minutes, in your packet, from the last B&G minutes, but I'd just like to recap real quick. We're looking to upgrade the staircases. The vinyl that they use for the stairs and the landings, they need to be replaced. So that project is moving forward for the summer. We're also looking to fix or remove and replace with something different the retaining wall on Center Street. This is the area that's sloped next to the softball field. We're also discussing an outdoor classroom on Center Street, and we're making some progress there. There was discussions of facility use, which is on our agenda tonight for the pizza fundraiser. We discussed all the HVAC upgrades in the building. All the classrooms have been done. There was a miscellaneous admin office that was fixed. That we had some air circulation problems. We finally got to that and fixed that. Now tonight on the agenda item, I think it's D7, we have the HVAC units for the Board of Ed offices in the basement will be replaced. We talked about sanding the floor this year instead of just adding another layer of polyurethane. And we talked about exterior doors. We still have some wooden doors left that we haven't touched. We have other doors that need to be tweaked. And then, of course, some maintenance items, replacing expansion tanks. And I don't know why I thought like little ones, you know, that's next to your hot water heater, but, you know, our expansion tanks were huge, you know. So we got those replaced. And we also discussed outdoor seating areas in front of the building on either side of the entrance to the auditorium and the entrance to the library. The steps will be flanked with paver areas so we can have seating. And so we brought in some vendors for quotes, and I think we're going out with revised quotes at this point. So it's just a lot of things that we've got going on. And of course, our roofing supplier consultant was here. I'd like to see that report, Megan or John, when you get a chance, just to give us a general assessment where we're on our roofs. And after all of that, I'd like to introduce items B1 for facility use.
I'll second it.
The new one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
Second by
looking at,
Mr. Walsh. Same.
B1.
Could
Mrs. Walker?
could I just comment on D10 and D11?
Not yet, because we're in B, when we get there, yeah. Greg brought it up, but not yet.
Not that I'm rushing.
I don't have the new agenda. Here it is. Here it is. Okay,
Any
so,
questions on B and G? Mrs. Acosta?
Greg didn't mention the trees being removed. That's also in the project plan, right?
that's right, for the Center Street outdoor classroom. Right. We're thinking of, we don't have a design approved yet, but from my understanding, we're thinking of providing like extending the fencing that's already there to the right by the softball field. So if we extend the fence over to where the transformer is, it won't have gates or anything for the sidewalks. That'll still be open, but the fence will be there and it'll be flanked with landscaping. So it'll be kind of like a terraced landscaping towards the sidewalk. It'll be nice. It'll be aesthetically pleasing to the residents, and it will give us some privacy for an outdoor classroom. But like I said, you know, we're still working on that.
Any other questions? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta? Yes. Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian? Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Curriculum, Mrs. Negum?
So we had a meeting with the curriculum committee members on the 20th of March and got a really good update from the administration team. There's a lot going on, and I'm sure everyone has the report in their board packets. We learned about Dash and Dot robots that are being incorporated. There's a lot of gardening and other topics being introduced for the fourth graders and fifth graders using hydroponics. Just a lot of activity happening. And then we heard about the future projects as well, where K3 will plan, design, and build a new community. That was a pretty interesting thing to hear about. Is I think they're going to build out a model of some kinds, and all the kids are going to participate, you know, grade-wise in that activity, which is pretty interesting. I think it's going to definitely add to their skills and repertoire. The fourth and fifth grades will create a farmer's market, and they're going to incorporate what they grow into the herbs and vegetables and in the garden. So that was pretty cool. And a lot of other things were also reviewed in terms of new math resources, et cetera. So I know there's a lot of work going on, and it was really nice to get that update and all the effort that's being put into the curriculum plans for the future.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin? Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question. Has the school at this point decided on using STEM or STEAM for the curriculum from an overarching standpoint?
No. Honestly, I've read a lot about it, and I just haven't strongly felt one way or the other. So I think the documents actually say STEM, but it's not that I'd be completely opposed to changing it. I just need to know that changing it isn't going to turn it into arts and crafts, which is what the number one concern is when you start to use STEAM instead of STEM. So if I know that our curriculum is going to really show art as part of the design process and not that, then we can begin to use that title.
The only comment I would make is that having gone to Odyssey of the Mind, which is an amazing program, anybody that gets a chance can see Odyssey of the Mind is a beautiful example of what a STEAM program could be. And I think that it is a perfect example of where you're not just doing arts and crafts. I agree with you that there is some intentionality that has to happen, but it would push us as a board to make a clear decision on this, STEM or STEAM, not an in-between. Make a clear decision and use it. And I would push the board and the organization and the school to push towards STEAM. I think it's a more integrated view, and I think we can be more successful with that. So,
Any other questions for Mrs. Needham? Okay, Finance, Mr. Griffin?
yes. Before I make a motion for the items, I do want to call your attention to D9, D10, and D11. The PTA has been extremely generous through the years, and they are also being generous now. So we have three, well, it's actually more than three, but there's some donations here, almost $20,000 worth of donations from the PTA. One set is purchasing iPads, another set is related to our STEM lab equipment, and then there's PTA mini grants that are just providing some amazing things for the kids. So this is huge kudos to the parents and any of the people involved with the PTA for making this happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, I will go ahead and make a motion for D1 through D10.
I'll second it.
You mean D11?
Yes. D1 through D11, thank you.
I'll second that too.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Mrs. Walker, did you have a question on these?
Mr. Griffin took care of it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian? Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, delegate report. Mr. Walsh?
I have nothing to report. We have the Delegates Assembly coming up in May, and that's where we are.
Where is it? Do we need to add travel expenses next time?
I probably should, yeah, put my name on the list.
Mr. Marmara, could you add that next time? Okay, personnel, Mrs. Walker.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to present F1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian? Mrs. Walker?
Yeah.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Policy, Mrs.
But you should have in your packet the first reading for policies. If you have any questions or if you have any corrections, please either send them to Ms. Bozios or myself.
Email 3 people, Mrs. Norian, myself, and Ms. Bozios on one email. Public relations, Mrs. Acosta? Think for COVID task force, I'm assuming, Mr. Griffin?
No, nothing.
Open to the public? Any old or new business? Mrs. Walker?
Just in one of my, I guess, NJEA manuals or whatever, I read a little bit about Chat GPT, and it's an interesting new technology that's out there, and it's a computer program that holds a conversation with humans. And interestingly, I was talking to my dentist the other day about it, and he said, "Oh, I love that." And he apparently has bought into it, apparently you buy into it. And he said it helped me in writing this dissertation or whatever he was, and gave him different alternatives. So there are pros and cons on it, because it can go to the extent where it's writing college essays for the kids or entrance exams for the kids. But keep your eyes out, because it uses advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to understand and generate human-like responses to text input.
I think Ms. Bozios took a class on it, or a seminar.
Did you?
Or you are?
I'm taking one May 9th, and it's my bedside reading right now, it's interesting when a book comes out on something like artificial intelligence, because it's almost outdated by the time the book comes out, but it's actually a really interesting book because it's a practical school version of and how could it be used for good?
Right, right. Well, it's like anything, if it's monitored and used properly. And I don't think we have as much worry on an elementary level as high schools. But please keep us informed.
I've heard people have developed financial algorithms. They based it on current or older algorithms, and prompted ChatGPT to execute these trades, these algorithms in real time during the day, and completely autonomously. So ChatGPT is buying and selling, investments. And I've also heard that if you get creative with the prompts, you can get desired outcomes, even if they're unethical. And so there's been hacks, there's always going to be the person who figures it out that's going to destroy our society. And that's already happened with AI. And so, people are talking about how can we contain it. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm skeptical.
So I just want to give big kudos to our administration and staff for being on top of this and attending these sorts of things. It's impossible for us to predict what the future is on this stuff, but technology is changing fast, and I think that as a school we have to be preparing ourselves for these things. So I think it's big kudos to the administrative staff for being on top of it. As an anecdote, I will also share with you, I love technology, and I love looking into how it can be used interestingly, and I certainly think it can be used poorly too, and in a bad way. But a random thing that I've used with my kid that's interesting, I was trying to teach him how to, he was learning about Paul Revere. So we read a book about Paul Revere, and then I used ChatGPT to pretend like it was Paul Revere, and then my son was able to interview Paul Revere. It's just a fun little way. So I think that any technology has to be really examined on how it's going to be used, but I think that creative minds and folks like our administrative staff are really on the forefront by being out there, so thank you.
Oh, and thank you too for that performance report. That was very comprehensive, Megan. Thank you.
Older new business?
Would just like to bring up the resolution that I brought to the board the last time that we said that we were going to take a look at. I noticed that it's not included in the minutes in any way. So I would like some mention of the fact that the information was brought to us and that we were proposed. I hope that you've had a chance to look into the Ridgefield Park mentoring program and would be willing to approve the resolution that I brought to you last.
If you want to make a motion, you can make a motion.
I'll
That's the only way
make
to
a
do it. And then if you get a second, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any discussion? Mrs. Walker? Yes, no? You have a question?
I'm still not comfortable with this because I think that, and I get it, that it's not only just tutorial, it's a whole ballgame of mentoring. But I'm not sure that we as a district are in need of such a program.
I think that we're not saying that we're necessarily in need of this program. We're saying that it essentially is that this program has been shown to be successful in letting students succeed. And so they want to support it going forward. And whether we want to do that or not is all that they're asking. If
And
you're
who-
interested in looking at a program that would provide for student success.
And who's they? Who's sponsoring this?
It's New Jersey School Board. It came from the executive committee of the Bergen County School Board Association. And it's based on what has been being used in Ridgefield Park. And when we're talking mentoring, I don't want you to get the whole idea that mentoring is, that there's going to be all this money and we're going to have teachers who are going to be mentoring students. This, I see even the way some of our older students work with our younger students, that's the kind of mentoring that they're talking about. They're talking about not letting any child fall between the cracks, of people appreciating all the students in our district and mentoring them to do so.
Mr. Griffin?
The other thing I would say about this resolution is that it doesn't really have teeth. Like it is just a statement of support towards, like there's no funding that's associated with this. There's no change that happens at our school. This is just our district, our board saying, hey, we support this idea. Now that may make you say this matters or it doesn't. You could say, hey, why would we even take the time to do this? Because it's not going to matter. It is just making a statement towards. So, regardless what happens, whatever you vote, nothing's changing at this school because of it. So I would say that.
Questions? Ms. Costa?
So why, trying to understand why implement this if it's just fluff? Or if it's just a vision or a thought, or I don't really, unless it's gonna come to fruition and do something, I don't really understand. Is it just like a policy that we would like to?
It's a concept, I would say, wouldn't you, Ms. Bozio? Essentially like a concept that you would support mentoring our students.
I mean, if enough school boards say this is something that they value, I see the State Department of Education putting together a group of people who are interested in exploring this. What might that look like? It just says to the Department of Education that on the local level, you believe that mentoring of students in any form is beneficial. Sorry.
So just, is there any material that the board could look at in terms of what Richfield Park has implemented? Like any sort of a report or anything like that that talks to how the program was implemented? Maybe that would help with understanding it a little bit better and agreeing to kind of support it.
Would you like to?
Do you know if they've implemented it?
Yeah, that's where it came from. It's actually being used, and that's what it got me to feel that this would be something that, because it's been so successful, this is how they've gotten the idea that it might be successful for all the students across the state.
Do you know what grades they implemented it in?
I believe that it's implemented for students who have need in the school.
Do you know
They're
what,
identified and then they're,
do you know what Ridgefield did?
I can't speak to it off the cuff. However, if the board wanted to wait, there are links on their website that I can supply the board.
Any other questions?
Hi, I have a comment. So first, let me say, growing up, I've had the fortunate experiences to have mentors in my life. I'm grateful for them. Some were good, some were not so good. But in general, I think mentorship is a wonderful thing, and I'm not opposed to it at all. The concern I have here is that I know what Ridgefield Park is doing. I read it. I can't recall the specifics right now because it's now a couple of weeks since we've last discussed this, but I did look into it. I did discuss this with several people and debated it back and forth. And the bottom line I have here with this resolution is I feel like it's a feel-good high five, I'm on board, but I'm also worried that what we might end up getting is not what I was envisioned. So, I mean, that fear is greater than me approving the mentorship, and I'm reluctant to, to give credibility because I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, look, the school is very important in children's lives, but at what point does the boundaries between a child's life in school and then continuing on into other areas of the child's life? I don't know. It's just it's difficult. So, and then I'm also concerned with, when we mentor one child, what about all the other children? So, and not all children are, it's not always apparent, like, I'll give you an example. I was in the back of the class. I didn't have to struggle, and I never participated, and I was completely ignored, and because it was easy to ignore me, and that's what I heard. Oh yeah, I don't have to worry about him. He passes his exams, and he doesn't say anything in class, and he's not disruptive, and so I barely know the guys. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm here. So, but the point is that, I mean, it's complicated, and it's the execution that worries me, and I want to see something more concrete before I give approval.
Any other comments? Mrs. Walker?
My only quick comment is I think the state also is throwing a chunk of money towards teachers to be mentors. Now, that might be another whole,
that's a whole different.
yeah, but it's all under that umbrella of the concept of mentoring is good for children that need that bit of nurturing.
Mr. Griffin?
So just to be clear about what there's lots of whereas statements in here, but the be it resolved is related to that our board agrees that mentoring has a positive effect. That's the be it resolved, that we are saying mentoring has a positive effect. And then further resolved is that that we request sustainable funding for mentoring to further mentoring programs in public schools. So we're saying mentoring is a good thing, and we want sustainable funding for it. Those are the two, be it resolved.
For those who use the mentoring program.
It's a universal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mr. Walsh is right. Like this, I brought it up last time too. Where this money is coming from has to come, it's going to be taken from somewhere else.
It's gotta be
And if we're not going to be using it,
Right.
that's kind of your point, right, Mr. Walsh, who uses it?
Sustainable funding.
Any other questions?
Well, we have for sustainable funding on everything that is presented. Whether we get it or not is high in the sky. But because we've been asking for sustainable funding on everything that is sent to us.
Any other questions? Call the question?
Ms. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Abstain as well.
Mrs. Downey?
No.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian? Yes. Mrs. Walker?
No.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
No.
Mrs. Nichols?
No. Any other old or new business?
I had one
Mrs. Negum?
one other topic to introduce. I know we talked about buildings and grounds, and there was some mention about roofing, and there might be some assessments going on to roofing. Just curious if we might be able to look into any, sustainable or climate change-related funds that we could get for introducing solar power into the school.
Yes, I think it was great if we can get climate change funds to increase the number of solar panels we have, because we already have solar panels. And I also thought it would be great that we had an interactive, like a TV thing in the hallway so that you can see how much solar power is being generated in real time. I know that we talked about getting that when we installed the solar panels. And I know that we have, I think a smaller display somewhere downstairs, but, the students don't see it, we don't see it, it's not, so unless you go to, Google Maps and look at the roof, you don't even realize we have solar panels. So I'm all for it. And when we first started the program, or we started looking into solar panels, we had issues with our roofs, and we had to fix the roofs first. And I know that at one point we were hoping to work with other districts and work as a consortium, but they all ran into the same issue, and the solar industry was not interested in fixing our roofs, and things kind of fell apart. But we continued, and we fixed our roofs at our expense, and we've then since added solar panels, and now we're in a good shape to add even more if we have the proper, funding. And the problem is, we've had competing priorities, and we still have competing priorities. So, but I'm 100% behind you if we were to get a grant or something.
And the reason why I brought that up was, I noticed we approved D6, which is that climate awareness education grant, and that was an interesting, right, piece of funding that we've received. I wonder if, the government is, and/or, jointly with the private sector, they are creating grants for schools and other nonprofits that we could actually dip into.
Yeah.
Any other old or new business? We do need to go into a closed session for student issues and special ed. Does someone want to make a motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Walsh. All in favor?
Aye.
We will not be taking action afterwards.